something Rubinstein would say.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Yeah, you get caught up. What do they say? The looking at the trees rather than the forest.
Yeah.
So, well, I'd like to. Yeah, I think I'll just begin. Probably more people will walk in, and so I'm Robert. Does this work? Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Good. I'd like to start by improvising something. I usually do this. It's become like a habit, and improvisation is sort of a lost art in classical music. That's why I'm trying to attempt to do it more. In other words, if you were to go back 200 years ago, you'd hear improvisation in classical concerts all the time. Liszt, Chopin, etc. They all improvised a lot. So I figure that's what we ought to be doing. And what we'll do is, if you don't mind, this will be like a free improvisation, but if you can give me a title for whatever this is going to be. I don't know, any thoughts? What would a good title be? It can be mundane, it can be serious, it could be silly, it could be whatever you want. So, any ideas?
A walk in the moonlight.
What in the moonlight?
A walk.
A walk in the moonlight. I like that. Okay, that can be very. You can do a lot with that. I like that. Maybe C sharp minor, because that's Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata is in that key. So. I thought you said a rock in the moonlight. That's a different, a different thing. A rock, a walk in the moonlight. So that's maybe a little, bad imitation of Chopin sometimes. Okay, so now I'm going to do a piece that's pretty new for me. This is by Gluck. It's from his opera Orfeo, which is about the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. Gluck was a Viennese composer. He lived a bit, he was writing a bit before the time of Mozart in the 1740s, 50s, 60s. And this is from one of his most famous operas. In the opera, this is not sung. This is a piece for flute and strings, and it's called Melody. It's from the Dance of the Blessed Spirits. But I'll tell you a bit about the opera. It's one of the best operas. I love it. I saw it, heard it live. Yeah, that's Orpheus and Eurydice. And it's, of course, the story of, how are you? Hey, good to see you, Krishan. Hello. So, it's Orpheus and Eurydice, which is an ancient Greek myth that Eurydice goes to the underworld. She dies, and, Orpheus tries to rescue her from there. He goes and pleads with Hades to let her go back, and he brings his harp, his lyre, L-Y-R-E, not L-I-A-R, that's a different meaning, just to be clear. He plays this instrument, this beautiful instrument, and charms Hades, and Hades says, okay, I'll let you take Eurydice back with you. However, if you look back while you're going up to Earth, if you turn around and look back at her, she'll go back permanently. So unfortunately, they're almost back to Earth. He turns back and she goes back. There's a similar story in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah, turning back and turning into a pillar of salt, So the thing is, in the opera though, because this is the 1760s, it's the Age of Enlightenment, and in that time, they didn't really like tragic endings to things. They edited the plot a little bit, so that at the end, Eurydice actually, she goes back, but then she comes back to Earth and they have this big party and celebration and everyone lives happily ever after. So that's nice, I think. But this melody is definitely a lament. It's Orpheus lamenting Eurydice. This is a piano arrangement by an Italian composer by the name of Scambati. I don't know much about Scambati, but he has a beautiful last name, Scambati. It's just such a nice sound. So Gluck, arranged by Scambati. There are many arrangements of this. Chrysler arranged it for violin, and there's recordings of Misha Elman, Jascha Heifetz playing this. So beautiful. And there's a lot of old pianist recordings of this. This is the kind of thing that old-time pianists used to play more of. They would more likely play arrangements like this than, say, Beethoven sonatas. I mean, they do that too, but you'd hear a lot more of these back then than now. So for instance, one of my favorite recordings of this is done by Sergei Rachmaninoff. He plays this, it's amazing. So here is Gluck Scambati melody. wish I had a screwdriver to work on that note there, that thing. If I remember to just play it staccato and use the pedal, it won't happen, but anyway. Now I'm gonna play a couple of Robert Schumann's Paganini studies. I've been working through these for a while now. There's a lot of them, there's 12. So I'm not playing you the same ones each time. Maybe I do repeat some of them, like I think the first one I'm gonna do, I did last month, but the second one I just finished learning like 4 days ago, so it's new. You know, I wonder if Schumann, or I imagine Schumann was intending to arrange all of these caprices that Paganini wrote for solo violin. I said there's 12 of them, but Paganini wrote 24 caprices. So why did he get only halfway? I'm not exactly sure, but maybe, you know, he stopped in the middle. These are early pieces of Robert Schumann. These are very early for him, 1830s, 32, 33, 34 is when he wrote these. And I think that they were a fundamental way that he discovered his musical style by imitating, sort of, by arranging, or it's like translation, you know, in literature, by translating Paganini's solo violin music to the piano. And as you get further and further into this set of pieces, you don't hear much Paganini anymore. So the ones I'm playing are towards the end of the set of 12. It doesn't sound much like Paganini. It sounds like Schumann. I mean, it's pointing in the direction of Schumann's own sound, his music, like Carnival, you know, David's Bundertanz, all the big piano pieces that Schumann wrote not too long after this in the 1830s. So to speak about Paganini, I'll say a little bit about him. You know, he was from Genova, born in the late 1700s, lived till about 1840, I think, is when he died. And Paganini was a wild man. He was like a rock star of now, or he was like a rock star of the 60s. Just think of someone like Jimi Hendrix. He was like that at the time. And I'm not kidding, you know, he really was this, just a different kind of musical creature from what was at the time. I mean, you could hear in that Gluck that I was playing, it's beautiful, but it's very classical in a way. It's very muted and restrained in some way. There's no restraint in Paganini anymore, you know? He was just a wild hippie, basically. And this was a time when things were changing in European culture. The monarchies were falling. You had the American Revolution, by the way. There's that great series now on PBS, Ken Burns, you know. The French Revolution, which followed, and then Napoleon. And so the world was changing, and the music was changing too. So Paganini is the music of this new time period. And the Romantics, like Schumann, they just soaked it all up. They loved Paganini. They adored him because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to follow in his footsteps. So Robert Schumann was a very ingenious man, but very complicated. He had probably bipolar disorder, and they didn't have treatment for it like they have now. His life was very difficult as a result, and very dark. He tried many things and failed at many things. You know, this is unlike, say, Mozart or Mendelssohn, who were child prodigies. Schumann wanted to be a novelist. His hero was E.T.A. Hoffmann, who wrote these, you know, fantasy novellas. And that's where he started. That didn't quite pan out. I mean, he always wrote things for the rest of his life. But then Schumann wanted to be a virtuoso pianist. This was what was, you know, the piano technology was changing at the time and could allow for more effects on the piano. That's when Liszt came about, and others like Thalberg and, you know, Henselt, all these virtuoso pianists. And Schumann, we don't know exactly how, but he damaged his hands. So that didn't work out either, becoming a pianist. He probably used a device meant to strengthen the pinky finger, a mechanical device, and that did something to the muscles. It's horrible. So he ruined his hands, basically. Probably around the time he wrote these pieces, maybe from playing these pieces, I don't know. And then he turned fully to composition after that. And so that's why I think he took Paganini as his model first. This is very early, and arranged Paganini for piano, and in doing so found himself. Schumann created these literary characters, imaginary characters, to reflect the parts of his personality, of himself. And this is almost like early psychology, you know, it seems like. Because Schumann created the character Florestan, fictional character, to represent his manic side. And then he created the character Eusebius to reflect the depressive side. That's what a lot of people say, that this is the bipolar in literary form. And so the first piece I'm going to play is definitely Florestan. It's all over the place. And so that's what I'm going to start with. This is Paganini, but arranged by Schumann. It doesn't sound like Paganini to me. It just sounds like Schumann, you know, it just sounds like his original composition, even though it's his arrangement. Funny how that goes. So here it is. Very what?
A very accurate description.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because Schumann was, you know, this is the words, they're not my words, being all over the place. I played this, not this piece, but a similar Florestan themed piece for my grandmother when I was in high school. It was one of the novelettes by Schumann. And that's what she said. She was a music lover. She said, he's all over the place. And I said, you know, you're right, because you look at his life and what was, you know, he was all about. And it's a very accurate description. Sometimes you feel like you almost can't breathe there. There's no space to. And I think that's the point. I think when somebody who, has untreated manic depressive or bipolar in a manic state, it's literally hard to breathe. It's just, and there's parts of this, like I was struggling when learning it, like, there's no breaks in it. And I thought, that can't be. Maybe I need to create breaks in the music, but I realized that's what it's supposed to be. I mean, that's what it is. So the next piece is probably the Eusebius character, or at least some of it, maybe not all of it, but the opening is just depressive. I mean, listen to the opening. It's, when I hear that on the violin, the original Paganini, I don't know what Schumann does to it, but it sounds sunnier. It just does. Think of it. Paganini was from Genova. It's a much sunnier city than Zwickau, which is where Schumann was from. It's near Leipzig in East Germany, or what was East Germany. Sometimes I think the climate of a place where a composer comes from also influences them. But anyway, that Schumann arrangement, it's bleak. It has resignation in it. Now you have other things that come up like these, I wouldn't call it humorous, but there's this like a little bit jumpy feeling or march-like feeling. So here's a march, something like that. That's march-like. Schumann in his writings created this fictional, he called it the League of David, the Davidsbündler. And they were people, Florestan, Eusebius, and actually other characters. I think Paganini was in there too, interestingly enough. And they were fighting the Philistines. And this was literary, it was just a fictional thing he was writing. And the Philistines were what he considered musicians without soul. And the Davidsbündler were musicians who had soul. He was kind of a music critic at this time too. So that's what was going on, and I hear that march part as like, that's the Davidsbündler marching. And then you have some sort of like whimsical things like, I think and I feel like I'm saying too much, but I think what Schumann does, sometimes it's hard to listen to his music because he doesn't develop in a normal way, where you have one thing leading to another thing. He'll have one thing, and then splice another thing, and it's like a movie that does that. You've watched movies where there's some scene, and then it cuts, and there's another completely different scene going on. And that's what Schumann does. These rapid changes of character. And again, I think he's trying to put a narrative, a literary narrative, into music. And it's fascinating, but it's not always easy listening. But anyway, this is a new piece for me, so, good luck to me and to you. So, yeah. Okay, so, I think German Romanticism is difficult. But it's rewarding. It's got so much depth to it. But it's not always easy listening. And the same goes for the next piece I'm going to play. I don't believe I did this here last month. I might be wrong. I've done book 1 of Brahms's Paganini Variations here. I don't know if I've done book 2. It's relatively new for me, so, but I don't remember. If I did it last time, it was very raw still. But this is book 2 of Brahms's Paganini Variations. And Brahms, the link from Schumann to Brahms is so close because Brahms actually lived with the Schumanns for some time. He was seeking advice. He showed up, knocked at their door, and they sort of adopted him like a son. And he lived there, learning from Robert and Clara Schumann, who's herself a great musician, brilliant genius. So not long after this, Robert Schumann tried to jump into the icy Rhine River, and he was institutionalized, and he died before reaching 50. So this is what his life was like. It was really tragic. Young Brahms was helping out with their 7 kids. Actually, Clara was pregnant with their 7th child at the time this was all going on. Now, there's this kind of corny myth that's come up that there was a love triangle, that Brahms and Clara, or Clara was 20 years older than him. And from what I've read, probably not. I don't see how it could have been with all the tragedy that was going on. Brahms was there as this was all happening. But, there was a movie from the 40s with Katharine Hepburn playing Clara Schumann and young Brahms, and I don't know who played Schumann, maybe Spencer Tracy or something, I don't know. Speaking of, I like old movies a lot. I mean, they're not old, I don't mean, I was finishing up yesterday, The African Queen with Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, and wow, that is just, that's really, it's an art. The way they act, the way they talk, and just the presence there, anyway, but back to, this, I don't think, as much as I love Hollywood in the 40s, I don't think that Brahms and Clara, I don't think that's what it was. It couldn't have been. It was more of a Victorian era romance, if you will. I think Brahms and Clara had a lot of suppressed, unrequited feelings for each other. That's almost for sure. Read their letters, they were very fond of each other. So that is, I think, what it was. Brahms was kind of a loner his whole life. He had this devotion to Clara, and I think that's what it was. I think that's what makes, in a way, that's what makes Brahms' music what it is. This concealed, suppressed, deep emotion. I look at Brahms actually as like a prickly pear. He was from Hamburg, which is, someone was telling me, it's not a place known for people wearing their hearts on their sleeves. That's kind of an understatement. People are very reserved. And Brahms he was supposedly kind of rude if you didn't know him. But if you did, he was the warmest person, And that's what his music is like sometimes. Sometimes it's thorny and it's hard to get into it, but once you do, like with Schumann too, it's so, it has so much soul to it. There's everything. There's melancholy. There's whimsical joy. There's everything is there. It's like a kaleidoscope. So, the second set of these variations, Brahms wrote. He was obsessed with this, the 24th Caprice of Paganini. A lot of people were, and still are. And Brahms wrote these 2 whole books of variations, originally to be finger exercises. I call them finger torture. I had to go to the orthopedist over the summer. Got a pain in this finger, and the doctor said, "What's causing you pain?" I said, "Brahms." So, but the second set, for a set of finger exercises, there's some parts that are just like, is this a finger exercise? That's just pure Brahms. It sounds like his lullaby. his vegan lead, it doesn't sound like even Paganini anymore. It's vaguely related to that, but here's another variation that's just, it's so Brahmsian, and it doesn't sound like a finger steady, you know. And I also hear this unrequited love, maybe this longing. There's a loneliness to it, and that's very powerful in a way. It's very understated. Brahms can be like that. So here is another part that's like that. So, finally, I think Brahms is a paradox in many ways. He was this serious, heavy North German composer, but he lived in Vienna eventually. Vienna is, if you look at a map, it's further east than Prague. And Vienna is, and always was, a melting pot. It was Austro-Hungary. It wasn't Austria at that time. And so I think Brahms' music is not possible without the Slavic influence, without Gypsy influence. What is this? For a serious Hamburg guy, what is that? Well, that's the influence of, Hungarian, Slavic music, and you feel it here. So anyway, this is book 2 of Brahms's Paganini variations, and here we go. This is a little longer than the other. Let me check time. Yeah, we're okay, I think. So, all right. heavy. I was telling you, it's heavy stuff. And this is, look at
You
the.
were right.
Yeah, I was always, will always give you a disclaimer, tell you what to expect. So now, let me see what I'm going to play now. Maybe something a little lighter. Actually, I don't know if this is lighter. This is something very sad, and then I'll do a Southern gospel. You know, I like to do gospel too. My mother's Russian, and my father is an immigrant from the southern part of Virginia. So I'll play this is actually a Russian folk song I want to play called Zhuravli, or cranes, like the birds, not the things outside working on the building. But it's a very sad song. The text was inspired by a trip. The writer is Jan Frankel, wrote the music. And the poet, forgive me, I cannot remember his name. The poet was a Dagestani poet. And he went to Hiroshima in Japan and at a memorial for the nuclear bombing. And there was a story of a young girl there who was very ill from leukemia. And according to Japanese tradition, if you make 100 origami cranes, you know, out of paper.
1,000.
1,000, that's okay, excuse me, yeah, 1,000, you'll survive. And she didn't. She made those cranes and she did. Now the story of the song is, the text is, I'm looking at the sky, I see a flock of cranes in the sky, and I imagine that those are the souls of the dead soldiers from the Second World War. Every Soviet family lost at least one person, including my mother. One cousin died in the opening weeks fighting the Nazis. The text goes on, I see a space in that flock of birds, and I imagine that space is reserved for me one day. So that's the text. Jan Frankel wrote the music, sent it to his friend Mark Burness, a great Soviet-era singer. Mark Burness, he was very ill. He recorded it, and he died a week later. And that's the story of this song. So I don't sing it in Russian, but I'm just gonna play. It's very beautiful, but it's pretty sad. It's quiet though. It's a quiet, sad. Brahms is not so quiet all the time, but yeah. you know, one thing I forgot to mention is important that Jan Frankel, who wrote the music, and Mark Burness, who sang it, were Jewish. And in the Soviet Union, you know, the anti-Semitism was so bad. My mother, you know, was Jewish and told me about it, that, you know, just, they would put it on your passport, nationality, Jewish, not Russian. And she was, you know, living with that, I mean, at every turn in there. And, you know, she tells me this with a lot of pride, because she says, look, the most loved Soviet popular music composers were these guys, Jan Frankel and Mark Burness. So anyway, now I'm going to close with something from my dad's musical tradition. My dad's, you know, Southerner, and this is an old-time gospel tune that I'm going to do. Maybe there's a little blues in here, because there are a lot of blues musicians play this too. Will the circle be unbroken? And the text is sad, you know, but the music's uplifting, and ultimately it is an uplifting song. You know, it's just, so anyway, we'll close with that, and thank you all for having me today. I always appreciate it. So. Thanks, have a good evening, and see you later.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was delightful.
Thank you.
Very, very nice.
Thanks for coming. Turn this off.